Greetings. This is the overview introduction to the Anthropology 340 Fall 2020 course at Chaminade University. And it's a course that's unique to universities here in Hawaii, as far as I know. So there's only about 2 or 3 places here that teach it, including us. And what it looks specifically at is the very complex set of ethnic interrelationships that you have here in Hawaii between different groups. It's very different than what you find in most other places. What you find here is the ethnic interaction is much more complex. And I suppose in many ways, maybe you could say it's much more integrated. Now, that also means when you get discussions or disagreements or conflicts, it ends up being very, very complicated because a bunch of people have multiple positions that they have to negotiate. If you look at other places, and it's sad to say currently right now in much of the US mainland, what you find is places that are very, very multi-ethnic in the sense that you've got a lot of different ethnic groups in the same location, most major urban areas like New York or San Francisco, for example. But the reality is those groups don't really interact very much. And in fact, in many cases, they seem to have a fair amount of what you might call sort of social dislocation from each other. And a lot of the whole discussion going on in the mainland about, about Black Lives Matter and other issues like that, is sort of related to the fact that you can have these groups actually in very close proximity, maybe even working day to day together, and yet having almost no interaction or sort of, serious dialogue going on between them. It's almost like they're just next to each other. The only example I can think of would be like a bag of nuts. You've got a bag of nuts and all the nuts have different flavors and they're all in the same bag, but the nuts really aren't contributing to each other. They're just separate entities. They're just physically next to each other. They're in proximity. Here in Hawaii, what you find is rather than the bag of nuts, in many cases, what you've actually got is more like a stew. You've got a bunch of different, flavors of different things put into this bowl and then cooked. So what happens is they all contribute to a common result. There's still different parts to it, but there's also something more that's made up of the contributing members. And that's what we have here. And that has pluses and minuses, as we'll see. So that's what we look at this semester. And because of the location, because of the history of Hawaii, a large part of the early part of the semester deals specifically with traditional sort of pre-European Hawaiian society, and then how that evolves into contemporary Hawaiian ethnic identity in the 21st century, which is, could be a whole course in itself. So that becomes the basis, because that's the, if you would, that's the playing field, that's the rules of the game that the other groups come into when they arrive in Hawaii. Because you have to remember, this place is ruled by Hawaiian monarchs till 1893. By then, everywhere else in the Pacific and most of Asia was under European colonial control. So Hawaii has a unique political history in that regard. And if you had the Republic, we were not a territory in the sense of being a colony of another place till 1899. And that makes us, really, really unique. And then it means that by that time, a large number of the various ethnic groups that make up modern Hawaiian society had arrived. So they have to interact, they have to deal with each other in the context of a Hawaiian ruling elite, not in American society or British society or, whatever colonial possession you want to spin. And that puts Hawaii in a very unique location, not only in contrast to other, parts of, say, Europe, Asia, the United States, but also with our Polynesian relatives who did not have that same relationship, did not have that same independence, did not have the ability to make a lot of the same choices because they were colonized under colonial control real early and in some cases pretty spectacularly brutally. So Hawaii is a really, really different place, and a lot of that has to do with history, and that's why the first part of the course is embedded in history, because that shapes everything that happens afterwards, including what you see going on today. In terms of the course content, let me add this in right now. Okay, here's the syllabus. When I post this on YouTube, I'll have the syllabus as an attachment down at the bottom so you can look at it there. Now, in terms of how the course works, irregardless of COVID or anything else, education's changed. Hybrid courses are going to be the way the world works for, at least as far as I'm concerned, the foreseeable future. And so what that means is you have to be able to, in our case, you have to be able to access Canvas, which is the educational platform that the materials are on. So that's where you get your assignments. That's where you see stuff. That's where you send in files, etc. So that's how we interact. And the other thing we're going to be using is Zoom, which is where this is coming from. This is a Zoom that I'm going to then record and then download to YouTube. So Zoom is going to be the platform by which we interact. Now, what happens in August, who knows? It's now late July, so it's anyone's guess. Theoretically, we will have people in classrooms and people will be able to sit in classrooms. Having said that, I suspect a large proportion or a significant proportion of the class won't feel comfortable or unable to do that. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to have the classes in Zoom. For whatever it's worth, that worked pretty well in was left of the spring semester when this whole mess started up. We have to be able to interact. I'm not a fan of asynchronous learning. I don't think that really is entirely effective, despite the fact the university is pushing it right now. I think it makes a lot more sense, especially when we're talking about the subject like we're going over with stuff now, where people can actually see each other, people can verbally engage in discussions or or contribute or see what they have to say or want to say, to engage and get everyone thinking about the material and getting the feedback to make minds work. And so we're going to be using Zoom. Now, what that means in your case is you can either physically be in the classroom, or you've got to have access to Zoom, which pretty most of you are probably already familiar with it. It's we use it as the standard platform, as most any place else did, most workplaces right now. So you have to be comfortable with using Zoom. You have to be able to access it during the class sessions. We're going to be having class at the scheduled times. Whether you're sitting in the classroom, whether you're on Zoom, to be honest, I don't care. But I expect people that are in the class to be there at that time because we're going to have to be able to interact, and we can only do that at a scheduled time. I will record the Zoom episodes and I'll post them, so that if for some reason you want to look at them later, you can. But I do not see people not taking the time to come to class to then watching the class later to get anywhere near the same amount of stuff out of the class than they would if they were actually in it. So attendance is, if you want to, attendance is going to be required in terms of time, not in location. So take that for what it's worth. From what I found in the spring, I think this works a lot better. In some, in like an intro course, maybe no need, but in this class, I think it's a definite need. So if you look at the syllabus right here, you find that we have several texts. 3 of them, obviously one since I'm involved in it, I think are very good. The other one is iffy, but there's a reason for it. Roar's Hawaii's and Hawaii is a really good book. It's very, very well done. It's very thoughtful. It's very thought-provoking. And for that reason, it sometimes gets people a little bit agitated. Even the title gets people agitated. Nonetheless, it's a really useful book, and I think you'll really find it interesting. The other one is Tai Tengun's Native Men Remade. Anyone that's involved in Pacific Island studies in any way, shape, or form, whether it be as a nurse, counselor, I don't care what it is, should read this. And the reason is it's the only study I know of that looks at how in modern globalized, Hawaiian society, how do men who see themselves as ethnically Hawaiian build up a sense of what that means to be male and be Hawaiian in the 21st century. There's a number of works that look at Hawaiian ethnicity, but I don't know of anyone that's gender specific. And I think that's really, really key because male identity in all Polynesian societies is really problematic, as we'll see during the semester. And like its female counterparts, has a lot of stereotypes, but most of them are not particularly positive. And as we'll see, stereotypes have a huge amount of power to shape not only how others see you, but also how you see yourself. So I think you'll find Tengun books to be absolutely engaging and are really useful. The third useful one is the one where I compiled Thrum's works. He's a 19th century publisher, but he was also mainly a printer. He comes up with the Almanac, which you might go back in history, and maybe they have online versions, I don't know. So anyways, comes up with an almanac in the 1870s, which becomes a big seller here in Hawaii. Very quickly, he starts throwing in Hawaiian articles and articles about Hawaii to reach a larger audience and make more people buy his almanac. You know, he's in the business of making money. Having said that, his dad was from Australia. He's born here. His dad works as a shipwright down in the docks in the 1840s, 1850s, whatever. So Thrum grows up on the docks. And what that means is he grows up one outside of elite sort of Calvinists, as we'll see, Protestant society. So even though he's holy, he's not seen as being one of the holies. Secondly, he grows up speaking Hawaiian as much as English because the docks are almost entirely a Hawaiian purview. So by the time he's in his 20s, 30s, stuff like that, he's bilingual to all intents and purposes. This shows up in his material. By the 1880s, he's really concerned about what he sees as the loss of Hawaiian identity and Hawaiian knowledge of their past. So he starts putting in a lot of Hawaiian articles into Thrum's Almanac and Annual. And also then gets other authors, Nakawina, for example, to contribute also. The other key thing about this is he's then writing about stuff as it's happening in the 19th century. It's way too easy to talk about what went wrong in 1893 and the overthrow of the monarchy, et cetera, from the standpoint of 2020. But the reality is that's 130 years of hindsight. You know, it's a lot harder to look at something when you're knee deep in it and figure out what to do. And I'll give you a good example. How do you deal with COVID? How do you deal with the American relationships with China? How do you deal with ethnic identity or ethnic values in terms of, say, Black lives in the mainland United States? It's really hard to discuss those in any meaningful way collectively if you're in the middle of it, because you can't see the trees, you know, for the forest. You can't see the forest for the trees. Thrum's articles are really useful because they're from that time. They are snapshots in the past as if someone from the past is talking to us. Now, it looks like a lot of readings when you go into the syllabus. Most of those articles are only a page or two, so they're not going to be hard to read. They're very well written. They're very interesting, and they're timely in a sort of creepy sense because they're timely from the time that they were written. And if you read stuff like that and then you look at the modern interpretations, all of a sudden you have a much different view of how things evolve to what we see today. Versus just sort of taking, 21st century authors, well, this is what Hawaiians thought, and this is what happened, and this is who got screwed over in 1893, et cetera. It becomes a much more complicated and much more nuanced thing, which is much more realistic because we live in a complicated, nuanced world. So I think you'll find that stuff really interesting too. The last is the McDermott and Andrade, Peoples and Cultures of Hawaii. This is a standard book. I didn't even know McDermott was still alive. This was the text back in the 70s and 80s. It's expected reading if you're on DOE or something like that. So, it's not particularly useful in a lot of ways. I don't like the way that they summarize a lot of ethnic groups. On the other hand, it is the standard text that everyone uses and everyone recites, especially in government agencies. So having it and having looked at it means at least you know where they're coming from. If you would, you're going to know the language that they're speaking or the way that they're seeing stuff. So if we segue into grades, which for some reason everyone's really interested in, you'll find that there's several things we're doing. Candace Sakuda, who's head of service learning, and I have started up the Palolo Pukele project. We're looking at, in conjunction with St. Louis School, we originally were involved in an agricultural project, which we're still doing down at the rifle range. But in that, we realized that we really needed to know more about Palolo Valley, and especially the stream and the back part of the valley. If you're interested in farming, it doesn't make much sense to not look at the guys who are still doing farming in the back of the valley when you're trying to figure out what to do in our part of the valley. So out of this summer grew this project, which is sort of getting larger by the minute. In fact, I expect by the time the semester starts, it'll be larger. So there's a whole different group of different things we're doing in the project. I've actually included the draft of the proposal or project description in the syllabus, so you can see what we're up to right now. I don't usually do this, but I'm going to require this for all students in the class. So this is the first time I've ever required service learning. I'm sort of ambivalent about requiring it, but on the other hand, it's something that needs to be done, and if I sort of browbeat everyone into doing it, the end result's going to be useful. You're going to get to choose what part of the project you want to be involved in. So think you've been doing this instead of what would normally be like a research paper or something like that. So we'll get more to that once the semester starts, but to be honest, I can't tell you more because I'm not really too sure what's going to actually be happening by the time the semester starts. I know among other things, I do definitely want to start doing the actual field survey of the stream. So we're going to have to see how that all plays out. But again, we're integrating that with schools. As of this morning, we might also be integrating it with UH Manoa's Ethnic Studies program, though I'm not really, that's literally as of, about an hour ago. So, as much as I do in that. The other main way that we do grading is what I used to call thought of the weeks, but it doesn't make any sense. I'm calling them critical thinking exercises. You're going to have a set of, as we go through the semester, as we cover a chunk of material, I want you to go in and look at some aspect of the material we covered, even if it was just in passing, and go into it in more depth and sort of critically discuss, what it means and how you analyze it. Again, I have a template in terms of what I want you to do when you do these. So you get to choose what it is you want to do your critical thinking exercises on. It has to be from that chunk of subject material, which you'll see in the syllabus. But I've been doing this for about 1.5 years now, and I really like it. And I think the students like it because it allows you to do something that you actually have some interest in versus just, knocking out an assignment. Last 2 parts, reaction papers. I show a number of videos in the class, and I'll post a couple of questions with the video. So when you watch the video, think of the questions and then react to the questions. You get graded on answering the questions. You don't get graded on the length of the answer. So it's just one of those dual exercises. A virtual field trip. I used to make people walk Waikiki. Obviously, that ain't happening right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Google Earth, and you can do Street View and walk it. So it'll be a little disjuncted in the fact that the video, the image grabs will be from the last 4 or 5 years, not right now. But I want you to spend some time going through in detail. That's why I don't want you like driving through Waikiki right now. I mean, you'll be so busy trying not to hit something, you won't be able to actually look at anything. So again, you'll actually find the description of what I want you to do and where I want you to go in the syllabus in detail. Let's see. Okay, so that's that. I think that gives you all the course material in terms of how I want to do stuff. Yeah, we'll just stop there for this since I said it's an overview. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me. And we'll see you in, what, 3 or 4 weeks, I guess.